Studio 5. So Friday night is family movie night at our house, and like many of you, I'm sure, we were excited to cuddle up to the new Disney Pixar release, Turning Red. It portrays a 13-year-old girl who, in addition to turning into a red panda when puberty hits, also has a somewhat complicated relationship with her mom.
This isn't happening. This isn't happening. Wake up.
Mother, is everything okay?
Don't come in here!
What's going on, honey? Are you sick? Is it a fever? A stomachache? Chills? Constipation?
No.
Okay, so slightly over-involved, strict, perfectionistic, and a little bit angry. I was sort of taken aback by how this mother-daughter dynamic was portrayed. And it wasn't the first time. Remember the controlling grandma in Encanto? Look, we know moms and grandmas are a powerful, positive force in families, but the matriarch in media lately seems to tell a different story. Studio 5 parenting contributor Heather Johnson joining me now with more insight on this indispensable role of matriarch. Great to see you.
You too.
So we see these characters play out on screen. I'm curious to know, does that really affect our perception of the real life relationship?
Absolutely, absolutely does. So we sit down with our families, our kids by themselves, and we watch these things, and we see these female figures portrayed in front of us. And as we watch them, we laugh at the situation. We put it on repeat and watch the movie every single day after school.
Yeah.
We sing along to the songs. And what that sends the message to our children is that it's okay to be like what they're watching. It's okay to be like that, right?
Yeah.
I can think back even when our kids were little, especially our son, situations where I remember him starting to watch a show called Caillou. Do you remember Caillou?
I mean, vaguely.
And he started to watch, and Caillou was
the baby,
very whiny.
the bald child?
Yes,
Okay.
very whiny. And he would watch that, and it didn't take but about a week, and all of a sudden he was whiny. I mean, I can still hear his whiny voice in my head, right? And going, wait a second,
You're
no
like,
more
hey,
Caillou.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're out. Little Critter books did that in our family,
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Where they would watch them, I would read them to them, and all of a sudden they started to act that way, where they were a little more stingy and they were a little more whiny.
Yeah.
And as we eliminated those things, it changed. And the only reason that matters is because as we watch these women portrayed, we've got daughters and sons who are looking at this and going, oh, it's acceptable to be like that, to be critical, or to be judgmental, or to be a dictator. That's what they're seeing. And so we do want to take note that what they view and what we laugh at and what we sing along to is teaching them and sending them messages. So we got to be really careful.
Yeah, it puts up a different parent filter, right? Because it's not just watching for the language or the violence or the nudity. Now we're saying, let's look at the interpersonal relationships here, which really matter to us, and how we're teaching and mentoring and modeling for our children. We have to look at it through that lens.
We do. And the values that these characters are demonstrating for our children, what values are they living on screen? Because they're very real to them. They are. They might be cartoon figures. They might be, they're very, very real.
I was shocked recently. I'll double down on your little critters comment. We read, Emmy and I pulled out Judy B. Jones. And everyone had raved about it, and I was shocked how sassy she was, and let alone the poor grammar that I couldn't bring myself to read out loud. But I was like, no, this is, so that is what we're talking about.
That's what we're
Just
talking
looking at the
about.
media with a little more critical eye and making sure we're bringing those values through the relationships. And it's an interesting, I think, pendulum shift, Heather, because I feel like 10 years ago, we were defending dads. We were saying, no, dads are involved, and dads can hug and love and kiss and smooch, and we were trying to defend the role of dad through what we're seeing in the media, and now it just feels a little shocking to me that we're having to defend the matriarch role.
Yeah, and we're having to defend that role, and we're having to help our children see what that role actually looks like and what it isn't, right? A matriarch is someone who connects. She is someone who bonds. She is someone who preserves. She is someone who worries more about generations coming behind her and the ones that came before her than herself. I mean, these are all characteristics of a really healthy matriarch in a family system. They're an indispensable position. And we should not only be honoring and respecting it, but we should actually be considering if we want that role ourselves, right? What they aren't, matriarchs don't control. Matriarchs don't dictate, they don't decide, they don't compare. Matriarchs don't parent or lead through jealousy. They don't do those things, right? And so we're kind of starting to navigate what it looks like to actually be that woman that supports and strengthens and represents members of our family.
And I love that you use the word healthy, a healthy matriarch, because certainly this role has expanded and in good ways, right? The last couple of generations
Yeah,
or decades
absolutely.
even, if we take a closer lens. And so it's this idea of what's healthy for me in this role and what am I communicating to those watching. A few other headlines that you say we should embrace in this role, mother or grandma, the role is chosen and then the role is earned.
Absolutely. And we tend to think a matriarch immediately means whoever's the oldest gets it. Right? So the oldest woman in your family system, they're automatically the
Crown on your
matriarch.
head, you are it.
And that's not the case. We actually have to choose this. It takes energy to be a matriarch. It takes work. It takes a consistency. So this is something we get to choose, right? Again, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
You can be considered a matriarch and just be the oldest in your family system. But that doesn't mean that you've actually chosen to take on this role and then execute it in a healthy way that benefits your family. We also have to recognize that there's a consistency and a constantness that comes, if that's even a word, to what this role looks like. Consistent and constant means we don't vary and we don't change. So again, as we're watching things with our children, as we're watching them for ourselves, and as we're considering ourselves as women and the role we play in our families, do we vary or are we constant and consistent? Do we not change? Do we make sure that we don't allow the love that we offer to other people be dictated by how they perform or what scores they get in school or if they spilled their milk or didn't? I mean, that's a consistency, that's a constantness that a matriarch in a healthy position brings to her family system. All the time brings to that family.
Matriarchs, you point out, uphold tradition, which we know is so important. The research tells us is so important to a cohesive family.
They do. And they not just uphold it and execute it, but they preserve it. So they understand why it matters, they understand what's necessary, and they don't get lazy in its preservation. You can probably think, I think to my grandmothers, I think very much to my mother now as my grandmothers have passed away. And I think and watch the way that she preserves traditions and what they mean. My mother is never lazy in her preservation, ever. She will sacrifice and do whatever it takes in order to make sure that those traditions get preserved, that they get passed on. And it isn't just we use certain dishes, it is more than that. It's why do we do this? And how does it connect us? And what does it mean for us? A matriarch does that. I also watch and recognize matriarchs in our own family as they preserve skills, which we don't often think about, right? A very silly one. I think to both my grandmothers teaching my mother and then my mom teaching me how to do small things like sew or play a piano, or in particular watching my grandmother teach our children how to grow tomatoes. These are skills, these are abilities that we pass on through generations. But we have to see this takes work. This takes work, right? It takes a lot of energy and effort,
diligence,
to preserve.
discipline. I mean, this is the daily stuff we're talking about.
It really is having an underlying testimony, if you will, of the importance of these things and being willing to stop at nothing to execute it.
Yeah.
It comes from honoring what came before and recognizing that we needed that in order to then preserve what's coming behind us.
Matriarchs value equally. Give me just one quick line on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because we watch these shows and we see that there's a lot of inequality in the way love is offered. And a matriarch doesn't do that. A matriarch loves equally.
She spreads
She
it out.
honors equally. She respects equally. It doesn't matter what someone makes or if they get to visit her more. None of that matters.
Yeah.
It is simply this place where we are going to preserve the fact that we are connected. And she does that equally. A matriarch does that equally.
And a stark contrast to what we've seen in these recent movies that have been quoted. They communicate. Matriarchs talk, they share, they give.
They do. And what they're communicating is even bigger than just how was your day. They communicate family history. They communicate values. They communicate religious beliefs. They communicate those things. They're very open to saying them and teaching them.
Out loud.
It can't be passed along unless we're talking about it.
Yeah.
But that's very different than what we're seeing on a screen now. That's actually what a healthy matriarch does for a family system.
I really appreciated this topic and enjoyed this conversation, Heather. Thank you so much. Heather coaches and counsels families, couples, and individuals. You can find her contact information on our